Good morning, everyone. I can see some people are still coming, but as you know, when we talk about disaster reduction, time is of the essence. So we want to show the example, and we are going to start this session on time. It's only a pleasure for me to chair this session on this high-level plenary on climate change adaptation. As we know, climate had been historically at the center of the rise and indeed collapse of many civilizations. But what we were talking was about natural climate change. There has been disasters ever since human beings are on this planet. But these natural disasters were produced by natural events, as their name indicate. Now we are facing a new challenge. Humankind is changing climate. The frequency of a number of disasters is changing already and will change even further because of this climate change. During the negotiation under the umbrella of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the emphasis has progressively shifted from mitigation to the realization that we need also to deal increasingly with adaptation. So it's not a matter of mitigation or adaptation, it is really a matter of mitigation and adaptation. And we could see this emphasis shifting from Bali to Poznan to Copenhagen, and even more so last year in Cancun. And I'm sure this will be discussed even more so in Durban later this year. The natural disaster are claiming still too many lives, and we were reminded. Predominantly so in the developing countries and the least developed one, but we were reminded recently by the disaster in Japan that developed countries are not immune to natural disaster impact. The good news is that over the last 50 years, because of better prevention, because of better early warning, because of better integration of all this information in disaster prevention, we are saving more and more lives. And I'm delighted that on this panel on the podium we have a representative from Bangladesh, because Bangladesh is certainly an excellent example of a success story in this area. But as we say, because of climate change, the past is no longer a good indicator for the future. If I have to give you only one example, I would use the extreme heat wave last year in Russia. It was not just something exceptional. It was something which has no equivalent in recorded history. It's something which could not have been predicted out of the past because it was completely outside of the normal distribution. So we have now to have a different paradigm for disaster prevention, which is not looking only at past statistics, but which is looking forward. We need to develop, to make decisions, we need to develop services. And I'm also very happy that among the panelists, Jan Egland here has been chairing a high-level task force for the development of a global framework for climate services, which will be launched today. So we are going to hear more about it. But my message here as a chairman is that the reason why we are here is that we don't want to make blind decisions. When it comes to disaster prevention, we need to make informed decisions. And informed decision is the key to save more lives, but also to contribute in a much more effective way to sustainable development. We all know that disasters have the potential to just turn the clock backwards when it comes to development. Remember Maldives. Before the tsunami, Maldives was about to graduate from the LDCs. They are now about to graduate just now, 6 years later. So that's a very, very simple measure on what was the impact on sustainable development. So I don't want to take more of your time because my role here as chair is very simple. It's to hand over to our moderator, Mrs. Rahida Durgam, and I will immediately hand over to you, and you will have to moderate us, which is another form of disaster prevention.
Thank you so very much. Good morning, everybody. As was already said, I'm Raghida Dargham. I'm Senior Diplomatic Correspondent and columnist for Al Hayat. I'm based in New York at the United Nations. I'm normally quite involved with international political affairs, so I am now a student and a very eager student to learn about this very important subject of climate change, adaptation, and disaster risk reduction. And I do like the title of this session, Alliances for Resilience. Conceptual links between disaster risk reduction, climate change, adaptation, and development have already been made. And successful partnerships between climate adaptation authorities and existing national and local mechanisms for disaster risk reduction have already existed and do already exist. But more needs to be done to strengthen the alliance between climate change and disaster risk reduction, as you know. This plenary will point to what is available for supporting implementation of the Cancun adaptation framework and signals high-level commitment to harmonize disaster risk and adaptation in national policies and in the design and implementation of resilience-building programs. This plenary session will be a discussion about what can be done internationally and nationally to advance implementation of the climate change adaptation through building on the skills, capabilities, and mechanisms for disaster risk reduction. So this session will try to answer the question, what can be done? The way we're going to do this is I'm going to be introducing each of our distinguished panelists, each one on his or her own, and then I will try to focus on their what they're coming with to this important plenary. They will answer the first question with less than 3 minutes definitely, but less than 4 for sure. I will go back to you, the audience or the participants from the floor, back and forth. I will gather some questions or comments. They have to be also quite short, please, in order to have an interactive and fruitful session. With that, I'll start with welcoming Ms. Socorro Flores Liera, Minister and Special Advisor for Climate Change in Mexico. Ms. Flores Liera is the top environmental official within Mexico's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Welcome. The Green Climate Fund was proposed by the government of Mexico and agreed at the UNFCCC's conference at Cancun. It was last December. It aims to administer financing potentially worth $100 billion a year by 2020 to developing countries at risk from rising seas, worsening drought, floods, and storms. These priorities, programs, policies, and other activities in developing countries could effectively put us on the path towards green development and resilience. So, Madam, in your view, what are the factors that encourage joint approaches in designing programs that bridge environmental, developmental, and disaster risk considerations?
Sí, muchas gracias y muy buenos días a todos. Realmente es un placer el estar esta mañana en este panel en un tema realmente importante. Yo creo que retomando un poco las palabras de Michel Jarraud, estamos ahora en un parteaguas reconociendo que no solamente tenemos que mitigar el cambio climático, sino también todos los estados, en mayor o menor medida, debemos estar preparados para adaptarnos a él. Y en ese escenario es en el que estamos ahora. Ahora contamos ya con información, probablemente es información amplia e indisputable, pero necesitamos todavía ir más al detalle y esto es un aspecto importante del programa de servicios climáticos que se va a presentar. Los estados necesitan información adecuada y cierta, científica y sólida para poder tomar decisiones en materia de política. Hoy sabemos pues, que el cambio climático va a afectar todas las esferas de la vida de los estados. No solamente deberán prepararse para desastres climáticos y fenómenos climáticos más fuertes y recurrentes, sino también en impactos en su producción agrícola, seguridad hídrica, en la salud, en la biodiversidad y la conservación de las especies. Entonces, quizás estamos ahora en el parteaguas de insertar de una manera más clara lo que es la adaptación al cambio climático dentro de los programas y las políticas nacionales de desarrollo de todos los países. Y eso es el desafío en el que nos encontramos hoy. Creo que todos los países y todas las organizaciones internacionales están conscientes del reto. Precisamente por eso pues no es fácil entender por qué todos y cada una de las organizaciones internacionales están llevando a cabo acciones contra el cambio climático y el reto precisamente es cómo lograr que todas esas organizaciones trabajen como uno, realicen sinergias, eviten fragmentación de esfuerzos, y precisamente eso es lo que se logra con el marco de adaptación en Cancún. El marco de adaptación adoptado en Cancún reconoce este desafío y trata de establecer una plataforma en la que ya se está trabajando para lograr sinergias entre organizaciones, pero sobre todo para apoyar a los estados, a todos, pero en particular los más pobres y los que enfrentan mayores riesgos, que normalmente son los que están menos preparados, pues precisamente para poder planear y poder llevar a cabo acciones de adaptación que puedan ser exitosas a través de un marco que incluya también lo que es el financiamiento, la tecnología, la planeación para el desarrollo y la acción coordinada a nivel nacional e internacional.
Thank you very much. Mr. Sabir Hussain Chowdhury is a member of the parliament in Bangladesh. Mr. Sabir Hussain Chowdhury chairs Bangladesh Parliament's all-party group on climate change and environment. Welcome. The people of Bangladesh have endured tremendous hardship in the face of extreme climate events, with tropical cyclone and flooding a regular feature of life in Bangladesh. The government of Bangladesh has put in place some of the most effective measures for reducing risk. Senator Chowdhury, in your view, what effect has this had on the everyday life of your people and your ability to achieve your development goals? In particular, we're eager to learn if your government produced any specific measures to build bridges between the different parts of the government itself to maximize the impact of the investment in such a goal. You have the floor.
Thank you, and a very good morning to everyone here. It's a privilege to be present this morning and to share some of the experience that we have had in Bangladesh with you. To answer your question, and if I may just preface my remarks by one point, both Michelle and Flores have talked about the fact that, yes, we will have to mitigate and we will also have to adapt. May I just point out that Bangladesh regards mitigation as the best form of adaptation. Because if you do not mitigate, if you do not have deep cut in emissions, then there is a limit to what you can prepare for, there's a limit to prevention, and there's a limit to capacity building. So I think that's an important point to make. As regards to Bangladesh, it's well documented, the fact that we are one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change risk and also to natural hazards. If you look at the pattern of cyclones, they're much more intensity as well as an impact. The frequencies are a lot more. In the 70s, when we used to have a cyclone, we lost almost 500,000 people. Now that has been reduced in the 90s and in the 2000s to a few thousand. So saving lives has been a very important part of our strategy. And now we are moving on to the next phase of looking at livelihoods. It's not just okay to save lives, we also have to look at livelihoods, because the lives that we save, what is the quality of life they have? And that's where the livelihood impact comes in. Poverty, of course, is a very major challenge for us. And one of the thrust in our policy at the moment is how can we have convergence between disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation? Because ultimately, I think the two are mutually reinforcing, and we have made that movement. The first step that we have taken in that direction is we have had coherence at the policy level. So if you look at our climate change action and strategy plan, it talks about disaster risk reduction. If you look at our comprehensive disaster management program, it talks about climate change adaptation. So after the policy coherence, we have now moved on to the next phase, which is convergence of the two. And ultimately, I suppose if we progress that even further, we are going to look at fusion and total harmony of the two concepts. This is what I would like to state at this stage. Later on, if I have time, I'll come on to the institutional arrangements and the practical steps that we are taking on the ground to further this process of convergence and eventual fusion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to introduce, right now go to my left and start by introducing Mr. Mamadou Traoré, Secretary General for Mali Red Cross. Welcome. I'm sorry, over there, right. We're still on the other side. Nice, welcome, forgive me, I went to the wrong, I jumped to left too fast. I should have stayed with the right. Forgive me. Mr. Traore is a pioneer in solar energy engineering and was active in the IT community, future studies, and in the field of research and development and innovation. He currently serves as Secretary General of Mali Red Cross. The country of Mali experiences some of the most extreme effects of climate variability, with extensive drought throughout the 70s and the 80s, conflict aggravated by water shortages. The government of Mali has introduced both micro-scale community initiatives and large-scale efforts, such as those around Lake Fabriguine. These efforts rely on substantial political, technical, and financial resources. Mr. Traore, what has been Mali's experience in harnessing the energy and capacity of the civil society in order to support your efforts? In your views, what does the civil society, how important is the role of the civil society in connecting these diverse issues of climate change, disaster risk reduction, environmental degradation, and particularly also with migration? You have the floor.
Merci bien et bonjour à tous. Oui, au Mali, nous avons une vulnérabilité qui est là compte tenu des conditions géographiques. Certainement qu'avec les changements climatiques, le monde en général et le Mali en particulier est confronté à ce phénomène qui est très très vaste et qui est violent. C'est vrai, dans notre pays, la situation c'est en lien avec la mise en fédération, la mise en commun des efforts. Le gouvernement s'est attelé à créer des projets, à initier des choses. Mais au niveau de la société civile, il y a des résistances, il y a des résiliences. Les organisations de la société civile appuient les communautés dans la résolution des problèmes qui, de façon générale, sont des problèmes d'ordre environnemental. Et à cet effet, il est évident que ce concours est tout à fait complémentaire au cadre institutionnel que l'État a créé. Il est évident aussi que ce concours est tout à fait essentiel pour la mobilisation communautaire. C'est vrai, c'est de ça qu'il faut parler. Et les réactions, les effets des changements climatiques engendrent comme première réponse la mobilisation communautaire. Avant que les secours ne viennent d'ailleurs, les communautés doivent se préparer. Donc pour la Croix-Rouge, la société, sinon le mouvement pour lequel nous travaillons, nous sommes un vaste réseau de mobilisation communautaire. Et nous apportons cette connaissance dans la mobilité face à la préparation face au changement climatique. Ces actions doivent être complémentaires. Et pourquoi nous disons ça? Parce que ces phénomènes, par leur nature, se présentent autrement, diversement. Donc il faut une connaissance, une compréhension de ce phénomène. Donc de notre point de vue, les actions de l'État, de la société civile doivent être complétées aussi par des connaissances, parce que les communautés ont cette connaissance empirique. Mais il s'agit de nouveaux phénomènes. Et ces nouveaux phénomènes ont une explication. Donc, au niveau de la société civile, nous attendons fortement ce transfert de connaissances, ce transfert de compétences. Bien sûr que nous avons une forte capacité de mobilisation. Nous avons, par nos valeurs et nos principes, nous jouons sur la dignité humaine. Nous protégeons la vie et nous sauvegardons la vie. Donc, il s'agit d'ajouter que chacun fasse son apport. Donc, pour notre part, c'est une planification globale, une coordination centrale dont on a besoin aujourd'hui. Les efforts ne doivent pas être isolés, les efforts doivent être mis en commun dans une méthodologie bien planifiée, dans une coordination centralisée, mais bien sûr dans laquelle chacun joue son rôle, chacun apporte sa valeur ajoutée et qui constituera la solution, de notre point de vue, appropriée pour mitiguer, sinon pour promouvoir l'adaptation au changement climatique.
Thank you. I do have a very, very well-disciplined panel, quite impressed really, because nobody's going over time. So we'll go back to you to explore further the points that are very eagerly awaited to elaborate on. Particularly, I want to get back to you, sir, with the issue of migration and the drying of the lake, and you may want to share that experience with us, if you don't mind. I would now welcome Mr. Sheikh Mamadou Abdullahi J. He's the mayor of Saint Louis from Senegal, welcome. In December, Sheikh Mamadou Abdullahi was awarded as a global champion for making cities resilient. My city is getting ready by UNISDR in recognition of his efforts and achievements in advancing disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation in St. Louis City. Welcome. We will continue to focus on Africa for another moment. Africa is urbanizing faster than any other region in the world. Some have estimated that as much as 40% of national populations are living in cities. UNEP has estimated that Africa's urban population will double from 294 million in year 2000 to 742 million by 2030. Much of this growth will be in the small and medium-sized cities. Cities such as Saint Louis in Senegal are exposed to floods and to drought. In fact, in 2008, UN Habitat designated Saint Louis as the city most threatened by rising sea levels in the whole of Africa. Mayor Jay, can you describe the support that you find from the local citizens in your community, also from the national government, and as well as the technical institutions that would help you reduce the risk of your city? Share with us such a collaboration. Thank you.
Merci, madame. Bonjour à tout le monde. Donc, vous pouvez donc comprendre qu'il y a urgence, surtout pour les villes comme Saint-Louis du Sénégal, qui a 250 000 habitants et qui voit 80 000 de ses citoyens être impactés directement par les changements climatiques. Cette ville est patrimoine mondial de l'humanité et elle est dans une réserve transfrontière de 350 000 hectares avec 2 parcs qui sont inscrits au patrimoine mondial. Alors, pour faire face à cette urgence, nous avons adopté une approche multi-acteurs, où nous avons mis ensemble des gens qui ne se parlaient pas, les chercheurs entre eux, les universitaires, le niveau national et le niveau local, les décideurs au niveau de la municipalité, la société civile, les institutions internationales et la commune de Saint-Louis. Et c'est pourquoi nous avons pu définir un observatoire sur les changements climatiques et un plan de contingence pour faire face. C'est la raison pour laquelle, dans cette dynamique-là, nous avons formé les enseignants, les instituteurs qui, à leur tour, ont démultiplié pour former 330 personnes. Et sur cette base, nous avons monté une brigade sur les changements climatiques. Et c'est la raison aussi qui nous a amenés aujourd'hui à penser qu'il est extrêmement important, si nous voulons réagir et réagir vite par rapport au changement climatique, que les populations qui vivent et qui sont souvent en danger et qui, chaque fois qu'ils sont interpellés, interpellent le maire, que celui-là puisse réagir et réagir promptement. Il est important, de notre point de vue, que tous ces acteurs qui doivent nécessairement travailler ensemble doivent avoir des plages de convergence pour qu'une réponse appropriée et que les doublons puissent être évités. Et c'est la raison pour laquelle, sur Saint-Louis, nous agissons concrètement en phase avec nos populations, avec l'État central et les décideurs de tous ordres. Et je pense que c'est dans cette direction-là que nous devrons faire face pour mettre nos villes résilientes et adapter nos villes par rapport au phénomène du changement climatique.
Thank you very much. I like this expression, teachers as a brigade for climate change. I like that very much. Mr. Jan Egland is the director of the Norwegian Institute of International Affairs. He has served as Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator from June 2003 to December 2006. And that's when we knew each other at the UN. And he's currently a member of the high-level task force for the Global Framework for Climate Services, as already mentioned by Monsieur Jarreau. So we'll shift gears a little bit, and we'll consider the perspective of service providers, both public and in the public and the private sectors. There is more than enough evidence that early warning systems and preparedness can have a decisive impact on the safety and on the resilience of communities on the ground. So we see the importance of risk information. Now, with the growing body of knowledge of climate change, is that body of knowledge sufficient? Is there sufficient information available for decision makers? And are we actually using the information that we have in order to do better, Mr. Egland? You have the floor.
Thank you, Ragida. The answer to your question is that we have a lot of knowledge, but it's not reaching those who need it the most in time for them to take action to meet the challenges. And I will come back to how we meet that problem. But allow me to say that when I was the emergency relief coordinator, traveled the world and saw the devastation of the growing number of natural disasters, that was exactly the time when the idea of a global platform for disaster reduction was born, and it was a distant dream that we were discussing in 2004, 5, and 6, and here we are. The world is making progress in disaster risk reduction. At times we have to remind ourselves we're making some progress, and places like Senegal, Bangladesh, and so on. Mexico is doing fantastic things that was really unheard of only 5 years back. But a lot of action remains to be taken. And I'm therefore happy, also in response to the question, to say that today and on Monday at the World Meteorological Congress, we're launching the report, Climate Knowledge for Action, a global framework for climate servicing, empowering the most vulnerable. Long title, which tries to send a very strong signal that science has done fantastic advances. It makes people in the North and in the industrialized world and in parts of the developing world more and more resilient to more extreme weather, to climate variability and change. But the advances in science are still not reaching the most vulnerable. And it's one of the biggest injustices of our time, that those who did the least to cause climate change are first and hardest hit. And they also have the least possibilities to defend themselves, because they don't even know what will hit them. So there's a basic human right, in my view, to say now all of the knowledge that will be there in the supercomputers, in the global modeling, in the predictability capacities of thousands and thousands of scientists, has to be able to reach all communities all over the world. So the bold program is the following. Within the next 6 years, the global centers, the regional centers, and the national centers all around the world will be connected so that there will be continuous climate services to farmers, health officials, to water managers, to disaster prevention people, of what will be coming, what are the best knowledge, what's the best predictions, what's the best advice to adapt, to defend oneself, and to take to also take advantage of opportunities, because there may even be opportunities for certain societies that they're not using. Now, we hope that in these next 6 years there will be an investment, and is only needed some $75 million per year, of which 95% is investment in developing countries to get this system up and running. So help us implement it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Which actually is a very good point to get to Mr. Jack Dangerman. He's the founder and Environmental Research Institute that is in the United States. And it's called the Environmental System Research Institute, actually, ESRI. Mr. Dangerman founded the Environmental Systems Research Institute in 1969 with a vision that computer mapping and analysis could help us design a better future. Dangerman fostered the growth of ESRI from a small research group to an organization, or recognized actually as the world leader in GIS software development. Welcome. The private sector plays such an important role in development, as we all know. The goods and services provided can support resilience or can create vulnerability. Some sectors have been essential partners in developing and delivering technical solutions through supporting decision makers in their work. ESRI has been a pioneer in developing tools that help people, just about anyone, to better understand their own situation. So, Mr. Dangerman, as a founder of ESRI and having worked for years to support sustainability around the world, how has the market of technical services changed? How has it changed in recent years? And can you tell us how your company has positioned itself or is positioning itself to address the complex challenges ahead of this the necessity to integrate all these challenges from the adaptation to reduction of risk?
Thank you, Regina, and thank you for the chance to address all of you. Geography matters is a term that I like very much. I embrace it because I think that the geographic science, to build on what Jan is saying, is a foundation science that can bring us together in communities for action. One of my good friends said, understanding precedes action, and certainly geographic understanding is one of the most profound things that us as human beings need to embrace and adopt. The tools that my organization builds are basically used by hundreds of thousands of organizations, perhaps many of your organizations around the world. And it's not really about what I do, it's about what you do in terms of creating understanding locally. Change is happening now at an unprecedented rate, as we heard earlier. What we need to now do is get real about it and see it, visualize it, and overlay it on top of things like land use and vegetation, biology, water, so that we can actually make real plans for what's coming. And that's, I think, the big challenge, is building in-country spatial data infrastructure, country by country, not only to respond to the episodic events that occur, earthquakes, tsunamis, and so forth, but to the very gradual, systematic warming of the planet and what that will mean. It'll mean change in habitats, it'll mean change in where we can develop urbanization and where we can't. This framework will provide a decision support framework as we evolve along our world. And so holding hands around the world with the right standards for geographic information so that we can understand these patterns and read in services like these that Jan is building and integrate them or overlay them on top of local knowledge like land use patterns or vegetation will be key instruments, will be key technology for us to actually create the future, which is, at this particular point, a kind of conscious and deliberate thing that we as human beings, I believe, need to do. We are creating the future with global climate change. We now have to adopt all the science, all the information, and bring it together so we can actually do geodesign, that is, designing consciously where we take the planet. And so it's a bit of an assertion that we take responsibility for the creation of the future of the planet, but I believe strongly that the combination of geography, the science of our world, with all of its measurements coming in, and GIS technology and the internet allow us to bring that together to create that understanding that we must have.
Mr. Dangerman, are we effectively leveraging the skills and the mechanisms that we have in our hands, or are we? Is that a failure, or is there an actual smart leveraging of these skills?
Geography is a science that brings things together, and certainly the history of geography has been to bring multiple sectors and multiple disciplines together. I like to think of it as overlays on maps, so we can see the connections between, say, climate change and human populations, or between climate change and vegetation changes. It's getting warmer, and there's many places on the planet where the species will disappear. In the Death Valley, for example, and in South Africa, many things are going to disappear, and we can now understand that by overlaying these maps of the IPCC's models on top of the actual data sets that others have gathered. Can we leverage all of that information into proactive action? Well, some places are doing quite well. They're beginning to grab this technology and integrate it in with planning processes to look 50 years out or 20 years out. They're moving species, they're moving land use out, but we must do that in a much broader way. To do that, I think we need to educate our colleagues in every agency and every organization to what's happening. How do you do that? Through visualization and understanding that visualization, geospatial visualization actually brings.
Mr. J, does this level of skill and IT knowledge, does it ever make its way easily, or does it ever make its way actually to a place like Saint Louis?
Absolument, parce que je pense que pour les données du changement climatique sont des données qui sont mondiaux. Et on dit souvent que le changement climatique ignore les frontières. Et c'est la raison pour laquelle il est extrêmement important que l'on puisse partager et les connaissances, les mettre à disposition pour que les acteurs à la base puissent véritablement l'utiliser et aller directement vers l'efficience. La raison est simple. Nous savons que les changements climatiques sont des données mondiaux, mais les villes africaines sont les villes qui souffrent le plus et de manière plus dramatique des effets liés au changement climatique. Et c'est la raison pour laquelle, plus qu'ailleurs, à ce niveau-là, nous avons intérêt à très vite comprendre les phénomènes et à bien les maîtriser pour pouvoir agir et agir conséquemment.
Tell me, Mr. J, when you were trying to mobilize your community and bring in the variety of people, from the teacher to the think tank, to the institutions, the local ones, to the international universities, tell me two things, if you don't mind. What was the most difficult hurdle that you had to overcome? And what is really the most surprising factor that you thought, oh dear, this is easier than I thought?
Le premier obstacle, c'est le niveau national. Vous savez, dans nos pays, la décentralisation est tardive et se met difficilement en place. L'État central pense souvent que la charge de développement national et de protection des populations est du ressort de l'État. Et à ce niveau-là, on a énormément de blocages. Le niveau de satisfaction a été le niveau d'appréhension et de compréhension par les populations ordinaires des phénomènes liés au changement climatique. J'ai été extrêmement séduite parce que quand on a fait le forum international, sur 600 participants, la ville de Saint-Louis en avait au moins 400. Et c'était des gens qui avaient une compréhension, pas scientifique, des phénomènes liés au changement climatique, mais ils le vivaient au quotidien et ils le vivaient dans leur chair. Ils pouvaient savoir ce que c'est que la douleur, l'insécurité, faire rapport à l'avancée de la mer ou à la dévastation des eaux. Et cela, je pense qu'on ne peut pas trouver une population plus prête, plus préparée et mieux à l'écoute que ceux-là qui subissent véritablement les catastrophes épisodiquement et quasiment chaque année. Et c'est ça ma source de satisfaction et cette compréhension qui me permet qu'avec ces gens, on peut aller très vite et aller beaucoup plus rapidement qu'on l'imaginait.
Mr. Coro Flores Liera, can you please tell me how big is the challenge from your point of view? The challenge of changing the pattern of policies and the pattern of behavior in order to do what you have wanted to do in Cancun. How do you put together these machineries?
Gracias. El reto es enorme. Creo que es uno de los mayores retos que enfrenta la comunidad internacional en su conjunto, la humanidad, y que requiere realmente de una acción conjunta que va desde la sensibilización del reto hasta el involucramiento de las comunidades locales y la existencia de marcos que apoyen precisamente ese desarrollo. Se mencionaba a lo largo del panel que existe pues una gran cantidad de información científica disponible, es cierto, pero hay que lograr que esa información realmente llegue a los tomadores de decisión y que los tomadores de decisión estén dispuestos a planear en el mediano y en el largo plazo y a involucrar a las comunidades en la realización de todo este trabajo tan importante que existe. Yo creo que se mencionaba también hace unos momentos el tema de la adaptación. La adaptación es local, no solamente dentro de un entorno nacional, sino también regional y subregional, que involucra efectivamente la participación activa de la sociedad. Entonces, los desafíos van por aspectos, van desde el punto de vista local, regional, nacional y todavía a nivel internacional para poner una maquinaria que existe y que está disponible, pero para hacer realmente que trabaje como una sola hacia objetivos concretos. Y quizás el mayor problema de muchos países y sobre todo países en desarrollo es trascender la planeación de mediano y largo plazo, porque lo que estamos ahora viendo son fenómenos de largo impacto que requieren la toma de medidas inmediatas, sí, pero también con un horizonte de tiempo hacia 2020, 2030, y que lleven no solamente el tema de la adaptación, sino, como mencionaba hace un momento el señor Chaudhry, la mitigación. Creo que tenemos que cambiar la planeación del desarrollo y ver en todas las áreas de la vida de los países, de qué forma impacta el calentamiento global al turismo, a la infraestructura, a la agricultura, al agua. Entonces, creo que el desafío es enorme. Hemos avanzado, hace 10 años no hablábamos de estos temas todavía, hemos avanzado y estamos creando un marco como comunidad internacional, pero sin duda el tiempo es muy pequeño y el reto es enorme.
Thank you. Mr. Chaudhry, actually then this brings me to you because you said something which was really touching. I thought you said that the purpose was not only to save lives as part of your strategy, but to save livelihood as well. Can you share with us 3 tools that made your story a success, if you think it's a story of success, that you are able to apply and that may be applicable for others in other countries?
Yeah, I think the first is a mindset of the policymakers, and I think we got it right in Bangladesh. When you're talking about livelihoods and you're talking about disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation, essentially you have to view these as development challenges, not just environmental events or ecological disasters. And the moment you see them through a development lens, the whole scenario changes. Then you look at livelihood, you look at quality of life, and I think that's the important transition that we have done. Of course, the challenge then is, how do you take this further? We have taken a number of projects which show the value of integrating disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation. For instance, we have started dredging the rivers of Bangladesh. Now, okay, how does that impact on the two? One, because of glacier melt in the Himalayas, you have more water coming down to the rivers in Bangladesh. So you need to increase the capacity of the rivers to avoid flooding. At the same time, you're building embankments and you're protecting lives and livelihoods. You're raising the homesteads so that people can be protected when you have flooding. So that's adaptation, that is also disaster risk reduction. The infrastructures that we have built up, the cyclone shelters, these are now multi-use. They can be used as schools when you don't have a disaster. They can be used for community purposes. We have developed a very advanced form of early warning signal. We have flags, we have SMS messages, and I think that's what we are trying to do. Now, of course, when you talk about livelihoods, poverty reduction becomes paramount in that whole exercise. So you have to give them the support. We have a whole range of safety nets in Bangladesh, and we focus in particular on those who are most vulnerable, the women, the elderly, the children. That's how you protect livelihoods. You try through various forms of credit, not just microcredit, because we have realized that poverty is not a homogeneous band. You have people who are in extreme poverty, whom we have never been able to reach or access through microcredit. So we need to have different mechanisms for that. I think the important thing is the mindset of the government. Once the government sees it as a development challenge, once you see it as a livelihood challenge, then all of these policies and actions can come into work. Just going to what Flores said, and I would like to compliment Mexico. I think their stewardship of the last conference, the COP16, was excellent. But what we now need to do is to, the process is back on track. We need to have the access to the funding.
You talked about $100 billion in 2020. Well, $10 billion has been pledged for the next 3 years, and none of that money is flowing. So we can talk about all of these policies, we can talk about all of these interventions, all of the capacity building, the merging of disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation, but if the funding is not in place, none of this is going to materialize.
Mr. Traore, you come from a different perspective. Can you put on your... Yes, you come from a different perspective. You are from the Mali Red Cross, and you have a different experience. I do wish to hear from you about the issue of migration on one hand, but I also would like to somehow, if you would have some ways to bring us the perspective you come from. It's completely different. It's the Red Cross, and it's not governmental perspective. Thank you.
Merci bien. C'est vrai, le monde aujourd'hui est confronté à un certain nombre de défis. Nous avons le changement climatique, bien sûr, mais la migration, sinon, de façon globale, on peut l'appeler le mouvement des populations, constitue un autre défi pour l'humanité. Il s'agit là de vulnérabilité. Cette vulnérabilité se manifeste autrement. Il s'agit d'un phénomène mondial qui touche l'ensemble des communautés, mais il s'agit du défi lancé à l'humanité d'apporter les services appropriés. Je vais un peu m'apaisanter sur les propos de M. Jarreau, qui aujourd'hui il y a des informations, aujourd'hui il y a des ressources, mais comment ces ressources pourront atteindre les cibles les plus vulnérables. La migration se présente différemment. Dans notre contexte malien, c'est un phénomène qui touche un ensemble de populations où réellement sont dans un environnement très précaire et très désertique. Par ce phénomène, l'avenir de beaucoup de pays se trouve compromis parce qu'il s'agit de la jeunesse. Et cette jeunesse qui veut aller chercher un avenir quelque part. Donc, il s'agit d'une question fondamentale qui touche un peu l'assistance que nous devrons apporter. Aujourd'hui, la Croix-Rouge, dans ce contexte, apporte une valeur ajoutée. Et pourquoi cela? Parce que la zone est marginalisée, elle est inaccessible. La Croix-Rouge est la seule organisation aujourd'hui au Mali qui a un accès libre, disons, parce que compte tenu des vulnérabilités, qu'il n'y a plus d'accès. Et les services de la Croix-Rouge touchent les communautés les plus vulnérables. Et par nos services, nous sommes mus par nos principes. Nos principes, c'est vraiment sans discrimination, apporter l'assistance à tous les horizons en tenant compte de la dignité humaine et aussi en tenant compte des valeurs humanitaires. Donc, bien sûr, par cela, nos stratégies sont des stratégies très particulières. Il s'agit d'apporter l'assistance, de faire une assistance individuelle. Oui, le mot est très approprié, de faire le porte-en-porte. Si les communautés sont touchées, nous nous soucions beaucoup à apporter ce service aux cibles les plus vulnérables et à la personne. Donc, la Croix-Rouge est le réseau le plus vaste réseau humanitaire qui a une valeur ajoutée. Et cette valeur ajoutée, c'est dans les services, c'est dans la mobilisation communautaire, c'est dans le traitement d'un aspect particulier qui est la dignité humaine. Donc aujourd'hui, dans ce concert face au changement climatique, nous pensons que de ce fait, le besoin, la valeur ajoutée du mouvement Croix-Rouge, nous avons des besoins. Et ces besoins, c'est en quelque sorte comment avoir l'information rapidement, comment avoir la bonne information. Pourquoi? Parce que nous sommes avec les communautés, nous savons qu'il y a des informations scientifiques, des informations techniques, et ces informations doivent être véhiculées. Donc nous voyons bien sûr dans les perspectives une relation très étroite entre les différents intervenants. Entre les différents intervenants, je parle de façon générale de la société civile, mais de façon spécifique, la Croix-Rouge est un vaste ensemble de la société civile qui est à l'écoute, qui est le véhicule de l'information pour avoir accès, pour porter cette assistance aux communautés. Donc, nous devrons avoir le courage de mettre en commun, de fédérer nos ressources, de fédérer nos connaissances, pour que nos services puissent aller avec la qualité et aller avec la pertinence et la qualité la plus appropriée. Parce qu'il ne s'agit pas de mobiliser des ressources, il s'agit de résoudre la question de comment est-ce que ces ressources atteignent, comment est-ce que ce service atteigne les communautés. Mais aussi, il s'agit particulièrement de services humanitaires, parce que les phénomènes tels qu'ils se présentent engendrent des situations ou réellement c'est vraiment une perturbation générale de l'ensemble des mécanismes habituels. Donc le mécanisme étant perturbé, il s'agit d'apporter une expertise. Je vous dis un peu comment nous sommes structurés. Nous sommes structurés depuis très longtemps à faire en sorte que les communautés par elles-mêmes constituent la force vive la première. Donc nous avons des équipes de réponse aux catastrophes. Et ces équipes, c'est au niveau communautaire, au niveau régional et au niveau national. Nous avons un système de fonctionnement qui permet à ce que l'information aujourd'hui, une fois l'information produite, arrive à 48 heures plus tard à un niveau opérationnel. Donc, nous avons à ce jour besoin de cette fédération avec les services de l'État, avec les scientifiques, avec les autres composants de la société civile, pour que nous puissions apporter cette valeur et pour que nous puissions résoudre cette question fondamentale qui interpelle l'ensemble aujourd'hui de nous tous, c'est d'avoir le courage de mettre en commun nos ressources et nos efforts pour que le service puisse aller. Merci bien.
Thank you. Before I go to Jan Egland, I'd like to open it up to the floor. So I'd like you to get ready with putting the sign up in the way that I could see that you want to take the floor. I'll gather 4 or 5 interventions, and then I'll go back to the panel. But let me go to Jan now. Jan, you know, you have been known, I mean, you've never been a shy person about holding their feet to the fire in terms of governments or organizations. We hear a lot about the role of the private sector, the role of the civil society. Fine, fair enough. But there must be an inadequate preparedness because of governmental policies or lack of good governmental policies. Do you feel that you have you can sort of point to with misgivings to certain failures in governmental policies that would have possibly led to certain disasters that we are witnessing or might lead to future disasters? Pinpoint a couple of things that you want us to look at and change.
There are massive failures in many countries. The failures are that many countries on a government level, national level, regional level, is not really investing in disaster preparedness nor in information on what climate change and variability will mean for the population. There is a massive failure because there is not capacity building and investment from richer to poorer countries in this at an adequate scale. We made progress since the Hyogo framework for action. I presided over that meeting in Kyoto in 2005. There is progress, but it's going too slow. Now, 2 things are needed. We estimate in this high-level task force that I co-chaired with Mahmoud Abu Zaid of Egypt. We had President Lagos of Chile. We had President Chissano of Mozambique there. We had high-level experts from and leaders from around the world, and we came up with a unanimous proposal that 70 countries need to be lifted up to a capacity by which they can actually receive information of climate change and variability, assess the information, and transmit the information for action within the national context. Of these 70 countries that have an inadequate capacity now, all of them basically are developing countries, 6 have nothing at the moment and can and should be lifted up immediately. The second challenge is that we need to get the scientists to really understand how to express themselves so that they can be understood. We have the basic problem that those who know do not know what is needed among those who are the agricultural and water and health officials and disaster people and the civil society on the grassroots, and those who have a need for information don't know what is available. I mean, there is a mismatch. That's why you need the user interface. So one very interesting session we participated in was in China. where the National Climate Center people, this is China, I mean, so they are, I mean, they say they are a developing country, but to me they look very advanced really, with all of their satellites and their scientists and so on. However, the interesting thing was that they were being challenged by the representative from agriculture, from water management, from disaster risk reduction, said, it's great the information we have, but we need more of this. We need different information. The first frost forecast for agriculture is not good enough. The forecast of flooding is good, but it's not good enough. And this is in a country which has gone from hundreds of thousands of casualties on average per year in flood victims to a few hundred per year in flood victims. And then the people say, it's not good enough. It has to be even better. And then the scientists say, okay, we'll go back and see how we can tailor-make the information even better. That's the future, in my view.
Jack, do you think that the scientists and people in IT and those nerds, if you will, have really got it? Or do you think that it's the failure of governments and think tanks and what have you that did not communicate the need for the scientists to get it, like Jan says?
All of it's there. People don't understand, or they do understand. It's now possible for us to conceive of a global geographic information system which would link all of our scientific information for the whole planet. I mean, I've thought about this a lot, where virtually everything that moves and changes is measured and integrated in through the internet to a geosystem, not simply visualization. I'm talking about a distributed federated system. And that system would be easy enough and accessible enough so that anybody in any country could access it. This is now technically possible. Don't you believe that? I believe it. But what is the obstacle? One of the obstacles, and I think that, Jan, you're going to be facing this, is, are you willing to share your data? Open data sharing policies are one obstacle. And you know, as well as I do, that this is no little obstacle. Even simple imagery and maps at 1 to 50,000 are very restricted in certain societies because there's a fear, even though you can see much higher quality on the open internet now. Second, we don't have the understanding through the academy and in decision makers of what's possible with such a system. People don't really know, and I think several people mentioned this. They don't know how they would use this ability to overlay information and understand it. Little farmers in Rwanda don't understand that they could get crop forecasts on their commodities or weather forecasts through their cell phones. So training. And then finally, standards, which would bring all of these different information measurements together into this global system. People have to be willing to accept these standards of interoperability, but also content standards at the foundation. So these are real obstacles. They're more social obstacles. They're not the technology. I see the technology is a platform that will enable what we need, but we need to work together or collaborate on these other dimensions.
Yeah, very interesting. We'll get back to the evolution of technology at one point on this issue, because I think probably a lot of people would want to learn a lot from what you have to say and explain a little further. I'll give you a little more time to explain a little further. What is it that you can bring to from the basic needs to how do you get your attention? Let me go to the floor and have the representative of UNFCCC first. Again, I ask you to be very brief. If you have a particular question to one of the panelists, do say so kindly. And UNFCCC representative, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks to all the panelists for their expression of high-level commitments for harmonizing DR and adaptation in national policies and in the implementation of resilience-building programs. On this occasion, I'd like to share some views from climate change perspectives and bring into some light some of the most relevant provisions under the Cancun Adaptation Framework. The Cancun Agreement, reached under the outstanding leadership of the COP President, Her Excellency Minister Espinosa, contains the most comprehensive package ever agreed by governments to help developing countries deal with climate change impacts. The agreement contains the Cancun Adaptation Framework, which ultimately seeks to reduce vulnerability and build resilience in developing countries. The Cancun Adaptation Framework includes a mandate to enhance adaptation through climate change-related DRR strategies, taking into consideration the Hyogo Framework for Action, early warning systems, risk assessment and management, sharing and transfer mechanisms at local, national, sub-regional, and regional levels as appropriate. The framework recognized the need to strengthen international cooperation and expertise to understand and reduce loss and damage associated with the adverse effects of climate change.
Can I please ask you to kindly ask a question? I cannot be taking statements from the floor due to the very short time I have, so kindly ask a question if you don't mind.
Okay, well, it's more of to share the information from the climate change perspectives, and I don't have any specific questions to the panelists.
Then kindly conclude in 30 seconds.
Okay. Well, the Cancun Adaptation Framework invites organizations working at different levels, the public and private sectors and civil society and other stakeholders to undertake and support enhanced action and adaptation at all levels in a coherent and integrated manner, building on synergies among activities and processes. So I encourage all of you to inform national and sectoral stakeholders with whom you interact of your readiness to support enhanced action adaptation by sharing your expertise and offering concrete action for addressing loss and damage. The successful implementation of the Cancun Adaptation Framework and ultimately reducing loss and damage associated with the adverse effects of climate change largely depends on the will and active voluntary support by all of you in this floor today.
Thank you very much,
Madam
Madam.
Chair.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Tuvalu, the representative from Tuvalu, you have the floor, please.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm actually a guest of Tuvalu today. My name is Marcus Oxley, and I work for civil society organisations. I want to just give maybe a slightly different perspective and also get to a question of why don't we go straight away to a common resilience framework at the local level? And I know that the Senator said that ultimately they want to go towards fusion or harmony of these different conceptual frameworks. And it's very clear when speaking to people at the grassroots level, at the local level, that people don't differentiate into these thematics of adaptation or DRR or poverty alleviation or food security the way that the experts and the professionals do. And it's also clear that we're just about to embark on setting up a whole new institutional silo, a whole new regime which is at the top is branded the Cancun Adaptation Framework. We're then saying that what we need is national adaptation plans. I hear from my fellow NGOs that then it needs to be turned into community-based adaptation projects. And when I look at what community-based adaptation projects are, and I look at what community-based DRR projects are, and I look at what people-centered natural resource projects are, I see these are virtually the same things. And yet we're going to set up another regime which will take institutional resources. And quite frankly, in terms of input coming in at the top, it's not a very effective way to get output at the bottom.
Very interesting proposals and suggestions here, very useful. Common resilience framework is something for us to think about and get back to see if the panelists would like to address that issue. The representative of Bolivia, you have the floor.
Gracias, Presidenta. En la línea que planteó el anterior colega delegado, también vemos con preocupación la exigencia de recursos adicionales para las acciones de adaptación al cambio climático. En esa perspectiva, en Bolivia se está promoviendo la visión de la armonía del hombre con la naturaleza, que es una concepción mayor a lo que es incluso medidas de adaptación y también reducción de riesgos. Pero la preocupación es que si bien estamos luchando en Bolivia contra la pobreza invirtiendo recursos que van más allá de las 5 veces los últimos años. Lamentablemente nos exigen además que hagamos programas de adaptación de estos costos incrementales producto del exceso de emisiones de dióxido de carbono producidos por los países desarrollados. Queremos saber cómo se pueden o se está pensando generar recursos adicionales, apoyo adicional, asistencia adicional para la implementación de programas de adaptación, pero también para el tema de reducción de riesgos, porque sabemos que en los próximos años el tema de los desastres hidrometeorológicos estarán de manera permanente y crecidas. Esa es la consulta. Gracias.
Thank you very much. The representative from Cuba, you have the floor.
Sí, buenos días. Mi intervención, la pregunta que vamos a hacer está relacionada con la última intervención del señor Egland, que con su tremenda y vasta experiencia en el trabajo de la estrategia ha hecho un panorama muy exacto de las causas que básicamente están incidiendo en la gravedad del impacto de los desastres. Y realmente él describió con mucha elocuencia las causas básicas que hoy día están incidiendo: la pobreza, la falta de educación, la falta de salud en las poblaciones. Y creo que, como bien él dijo, estaremos evaluando siempre las consecuencias del cambio climático mientras no hayan políticas que generen un mejoramiento del cambio climático, mientras las consecuencias, las causas que generan el cambio no se modifiquen. Estoy de acuerdo con lo que acaba de plantear el colega de Bolivia, porque jamás habrán recursos suficientes para reducir el riesgo ante el creciente y cada vez más fuerte daño al medio ambiente. ¿Usted cree realmente que lo que se está planteando sobre prevención sea posible en la perspectiva del agravamiento del cambio climático, en la situación actual y perspectiva que no se reducen las causas que están dañando el medio ambiente?
I have, at least for the moment, I could only take the 5 I have on the list. And again, I appreciate the brevity. And I have Switzerland, Cook Islands, Philippines, Sierra Leone, and Russia. So, and then if I have the chance, I'll come back to the rest of you. It's very engaging and very interesting to have your points of views, but I need back and forth between the panel and you. So the representative from Switzerland, please, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much. Beat von Däniken, Head of Staff of Swiss Humanitarian Aid. We've heard that it is very important to link knowledge with the decision makers. That would be one stage of level. And we heard yesterday actually as well how important leadership is at all levels, national level, local level, municipality level, safer city level, and leadership is crucial there. So my question would be to you, how could you better address what you found out on the scientific way to the leaders? How could you better explain them what comes up in about 20 years or even longer period, knowing that we have here a political reality that they are staying in place for 4 years? I mean, there's a gap of time. They're not interested in a 20 years process. They're interested in a short-term process. What could you do to make that change?
Thank you very much. My apologies to the representative from Austria. You were ahead of the others, so please do have the floor now.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. J'aurais une question, plutôt 2 questions précises pour Monsieur le maire de Saint-Louis du Sénégal. Vous avez parlé, j'ai trouvé très intéressant votre idée d'une approche multi-acteurs, et vous avez parlé d'une brigade sur les changements climatiques. Est-ce que vous pourriez, première question, élaborer un petit peu comment ça se traduit concrètement? Je sais que Saint-Louis connaît beaucoup d'inondations, par exemple. Comment ça se traduit dans la vie de chaque jour pour mieux préparer les catastrophes naturelles? Et deuxième question, plutôt de principe, est-ce que vous pensez, ou est-ce que vous ne pensez pas, qu'il faudrait un changement d'approche parmi vos partenaires au développement que vous avez, puisque le Sénégal est un pays en voie de développement, qu'il vaudrait mieux cofinancer ou financer certains, par exemple, je simplifie, un observatoire efficace pour prévoir un petit peu mieux les catastrophes à venir, plutôt que de creuser le énième puits. Je simplifie. Merci.
Cook Islands, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's been some mention of the need for information to reach decision makers in terms of disaster risk reduction and climate change. If I can just speak from a SIDS perspective, our policy makers know about disaster risk management and reduction and climate change because this is our reality. I think if there is information that needs to reach certain policymakers, it is to reach the policymakers of the developed countries. We have plans in place, but addressing these, what the content of these plans needs adequate financing. I'm not quite sure as to who I should direct this question to. Maybe I should take this question to the UNFCCC, but do you see the developing countries agreeing to put in place this climate change adaptation funding that we're hearing about anytime soon?
Thank you very much. The representative from the Philippines, you have the floor.
Thank you. My name is Corazon Juliano Soliman. I'm the Minister for Social Welfare and Development, and I have 2 points, a question and a point. The first point, I think, is for all of us. We've heard about collaboration and the need to work, and this is a panel on Alliance for Resiliency. It would be good to hear from the panel inspiring stories of how, at the global level, alliances for resiliency had in fact worked. We've heard of challenges to collaborate. I think it would be good to hear from your own experiences what has happened in terms of efforts. I'm sure there are efforts that have been started, and we would like to hear what has happened to that. For example, and this is the second point, there are commitments made by many countries, especially the industrialized countries, collaboration along those commitments and making sure that it reaches developing countries and the need to assist and collaborate at that level. Any updates on that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. I now have the representative from Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Now, for countries like ours, Sierra Leone, which has been classified as a least developed country, and whose economies are basically donor-driven, and they themselves are subjected not only to climatic risk, but all sorts of risks. Now, how do you think that the international community can help us in DRR and climate change adaptation issues? That's the first question. The second question is that, now the Sierra Leone government has participated in the UNFCCC activities. We have developed the initial national communication, the second national communication, and we are now developing, we have already developed the National Adaptation Action Plan. And we are in the process of developing the second national communication. But interestingly, the adaptation fund that is being widely talked about, no money has been allocated for the implementation of all the projects that have been developed in our NAPA. Only one component has been funded. Can the international community to help us do more in order to increase our resilience? I thank you very much. I'm the National Coordinator for Climate Change Project in Sierra Leone, Reynold Johnson.
Thank you very much. The representative from Russia, you have the floor.
Спасибо, госпожа председатель. Мой вопрос и комментарий являются реакцией на сообщение господина Эгланда, в частности на то, что было сказано, как я понял, у нас есть масса знаний, проблема в том, как их донести. Я абсолютно разделяю эту точку зрения, действительно есть проблема, как донести знания, но насколько достаточны знания, которыми мы располагаем в области изменений климата, в области климатических воздействий и особенно в области адаптации. Особенно речь идет, возможно, о недостатке знаний в экономическом плане, в экономических оценках, количественных оценках этих самых климатических воздействий и мер по адаптации. Я в связи с этим хочу очень короткую информацию дать, что Россия организует 7-9 ноября как раз конференцию международную по проблемам адаптации к изменению климата. И как раз слоганом этой конференции является знание как основной ресурс, как основной фактор адаптации. То есть суть того, что я хотел сказать, что, может быть, мы немножко преувеличиваем наш, так сказать, вот этот самый ресурс, имеющийся в виде знаний.
Thank you very much. And the last word from the floor will go to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. I just had one question to ask Mr. Dangerman, who gave an interesting view of the potential for a global geographic information system to facilitate disaster risk reduction and climate change work. Mr. Dangerman, you stressed the difficulty of data sharing, but raw data are one matter, analysis and analysed data are other matters, and in many ways much more meaningful for users. So my question to you is really whether the same obstacles stand in the way of using analysed data as stand in the way of using raw data. Thank you.
So what I'll do now is that I will give Jack the floor so that you'll answer this question and anything else you would like to address in, unfortunately, 2 minutes, plus use 1 minute to conclude with what you have walked away from this discussion. What are you taking with you, and what are you leaving us with? So you have a total of 3 minutes, 2 to answer questions, 1 to frame your own message, and forgive me for rushing you like this. I have no other choice. Thank you.
Yeah, I first want to acknowledge what the gentleman from Russia mentioned, is that we keep emphasizing that we know so much, but actually we know very little. And the data brought together through services and the web is what we have. It's the best available data we have. The knowledge on top of that data is even more difficult in some ways more remote. Just like the web itself, we have just a whole plethora of stuff. How can we actually bring it together to create interpretive knowledge, or I like to call it actionable knowledge? Geography and mapping are one nice way to do it. That's my own point of view. Not only to communicate that knowledge, but also to create a kind of understanding. I think somebody asked the question, how do we get decision makers to understand what's going on? I think people can understand through map visualization that quite well. So I'm comforted in that in some ways, but I'm also worried that we don't really know exactly what's going on. We kind of piece it together with visualization, we tell stories with it, but in fact the depth of that is pretty shaky. I don't know, I think I'll just stop there because, do you want to say anything else? I still have 1 extra minute, okay. Visualization is one part. To me, the big challenge is getting real with action. That means in your country or in your city or in your place. And how do you get real? I think you get spatially specific real with respect to understanding the risk and also making designs about the future. That isn't going to come from the UN. It's going to come from you getting real in your own place and designing a future that is actually conscious of the climate change that's happening and adapting to it. For me, that's where my sense of reality is. Like, get real. We're all going to have to get real. It's going to happen. It's not going to be the episodic event like the hurricane or the earthquake. It's going to be some decades as it systematically marches along. But we can at least understand that at some level by bringing the information together. I don't know if that answers your question about knowledge. I'm a little more uncomfortable with knowledge than I am just bringing the data together.
Well, please join me in thanking Jack Dangerman for his contribution to today's discussion. Thank you. Jan Egland, you have the floor.
Thank you. Many good questions, many good observations. I do agree that a danger for all of us now in launching this global framework for climate services is that we're raising unrealistic expectations. And I agree with Russia in that. I mean, there is a lot of things one cannot yet predict, and there are a lot of expectations that cannot yet be met. But I was impressed by looking at country case after country case in the north and the south, how many have advanced in coupling the existing knowledge, which is much bigger than it was 10, 15, or 20 years ago, with action, sector by sector. There are countries who have started with crop substitution. I mean, they moved where they're performing agriculture. They have different kinds of crops. They are successfully adapting because they have more knowledge. In terms of disaster risk reduction, the results from many countries are phenomenal, in part because there is more information of extreme patterns, how extreme weather will affect. Never will we be able to say that next flood comes November 2013, and it will be on the 10th, and you must prepare. We will never be able to say that. But we can say that there will be more and more floods, and they will reach extremes to this or that level. So prepare for that. Now, on Cuba, Sierra Leone, Bolivia, and others very correctly say there needs to be more resources for adaptation. There needs to be more resources for disaster risk reduction. It's going too slow. It's really beyond my little portfolio at the time to influence this. But yes, there is too little money going into this at the moment. However, it is very interesting to see how countries equally poor, equally challenged, have a vastly different experience in meeting these challenges. And here comes leadership, that's what mentioned with Switzerland. And I would say, Cuba, you're an example in disaster preparedness. When I was emergency relief coordinator, travel the world, I always gave the example of Cuba, who has really had enormous results in basically organizing itself better. So there is also a question of social organization and leadership here. 30 seconds. What do I do with my 30 seconds?
I'm giving you those as extra.
But it's just by saying the following. I mean, I would be, for example, very disappointed if a global high-level task force with north, south, east, west, all parts of the world says basically agree on something on the climate area and say it doesn't take more than $70 million or so to implement a global system that will give more information, which is the same as the NATO spends in 5 hours in Afghanistan, or half a day of ice cream consumption in Western Europe. And the world says, no, we cannot afford that investment. We cannot afford in having the least developed know how things will change and how they can adapt to this. Of course, we can afford it.
Well, this is an incredible message to be greeting and thanking Jan Egland for his contribution to this session. Mayor Jay, the floor is yours.
Merci. Je voudrais d'abord un tout petit peu revenir, comme l'a posé une question, sur la brigade. En fait, il s'agit d'une équipe qui fait de la sensibilisation et de l'information auprès de nos citoyens. Il y a à veiller à ce que les zones qui sont non aedificandi ne puissent pas être occupées pour que demain les populations puissent être mises en danger. Et deuxièmement, lorsque vient la période des inondations, nos équipes interviennent sur le terrain. Nous avons au niveau de la commune acheté pas mal de motopompes de grande puissance pour permettre à soulager les populations. Et ces mêmes équipes interviennent pour des mesures de prophylaxie, de désinfection et de désinsectisation pour aider les populations à traverser ou à supporter ces périodes extrêmement difficiles pour elles. Évidemment, je pense qu'il y a urgence pour changer d'approche. Changer d'approche parce qu'on dit souvent qu'on ne peut pas trouver meilleur expert pour le Sénégal que le citoyen sénégalais qui vit au quotidien ses propres problèmes. Par rapport aux fonds internationaux qui veulent intervenir en Afrique, il est extrêmement important, cette fois-ci, de changer la donne. Il faut venir écouter ce que l'on veut aider. Quand tu veux aider quelqu'un et que tu ne lui demandes pas ce dans quoi il a besoin d'être aidé, vous voyez que vous pourrez dépenser tout l'argent que vous voudrez, mais vous n'aurez rien en termes d'efficacité. Ce qu'il y a encore d'urgent aujourd'hui, est-ce que nos pays sont prêts à financer? Je crois que par rapport aux catastrophes que vivent nos pays, nous sommes prêts, mais il y a urgence. C'est une occasion, avec les changements climatiques, de globaliser le monde et d'avoir une vision mondiale. Ce qui se fait à Tokyo ou se fait à Washington impacte jusqu'à Saint-Louis du Sénégal, qui est à des milliers de kilomètres. Et il est important, de mon point de vue, si nous voulons véritablement avoir une vision planétaire et une vision pour le futur dans un système de développement durable, la question du changement climatique doit interpeller les consciences collectives des citoyens du monde. Et c'est pour cette raison-là qu'il est urgent d'avoir des alliances internes à l'intérieur des autorités locales dans nos villes, des alliances sous-régionaux dans nos pays et aussi une alliance internationale à travers les villes et à travers tous les réseaux disponibles, parce qu'il s'agit ni plus ni moins que de la survie de notre planète et aussi du futur de nos enfants. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to go to your city. Ms. Socorro Flores Liera.
Sí, muchas gracias. Creo que uno de los elementos que me deja esta reunión es ver que existe un sentido de urgencia compartido y una enorme frustración en la gran mayoría de todos porque no estamos avanzando con la rapidez que este desafío realmente presenta para todos. El cambio climático realmente es un tema de supervivencia y es un tema de bienestar de las poblaciones y es necesario fortalecer los esfuerzos. Se habló mucho del tema de financiamiento, creo que es un tema pilar cuando en las negociaciones de cambio climático se busca precisamente construir un paquete que no solamente sea aisladamente ver la adaptación, sino ver la mitigación, la adaptación, la tecnología y el financiamiento articulados en una visión de largo plazo que precisamente es cómo lograr que el calentamiento global genere los menores impactos posibles, porque desafortunadamente sabemos y tenemos la información científica para saber que todos los países vamos a seguir sufriendo los impactos del calentamiento global en mayor o menor medida. Entonces, el tema de financiamiento es un tema prioritario, así se ha venido manejando. Hay una serie de discusiones en curso para saber de dónde van a salir los recursos, cuál es la participación de la sociedad civil, cuál es el involucramiento del sector privado, qué tanto deben poner los gobiernos, los países desarrollados. Es una discusión que está en curso y sin duda tenemos que acelerarla, pero por supuesto tratando de mover todas las áreas del paquete al mismo tiempo. Entonces, es un enorme desafío, creo que hay enorme frustración en todos y que debemos acelerar el paso, queda muy poco tiempo. Creo que en Cancún se adoptaron decisiones fundamentales que nos ponen en el camino de la cooperación internacional. Ahora hay que materializarlas y, por supuesto, hay que ampliar el nivel de ambición, porque Cancún es un inicio, es un común denominador, es un paso incipiente, pero hay que hacer todavía mucho más.
Thank you very much. Senator Chowdhury.
Thank you. Taking a cue from what Flores said, I think it's the frustration, the disappointment, and even the anger is not just because of the fact that we are not moving quickly enough. I think we are not moving far enough. You know, our ambition levels have to be a lot higher. What I find positive about the session today is the fact that we have addressed DRR and CCA as an integral concept. I think that's the most important part. The conceptual understanding is there, but we now need to move on and implement that concept. And I've shared with you what we have done in the context of Bangladesh. And I think if we do that, then there was a very interesting question about a common resilience framework. That is really what we are then talking about through this fusion, through this convergence. Because, I mean, essentially, disaster risk reduction is an integral part of climate change adaptation. These are the first steps that we take on the ground level to respond to climate change adaptation. So that's how the two come together. Other than finance, I think technology is also very important. And the right technology at the right price. Unless we have access to technology, then even if we have finance, we are going to be falling short. I think the other important issue that I would like to register here is that we have to treat the causes and not the symptoms. You know, climate change, adaptation, if you only look at adaptation, we are treating the symptoms. The basic cause is mitigation. The approach is mitigation, and through mitigation we get to adaptation. Unless we are able to reduce our emissions, even the Cancun adaptation framework and the agreement talks about 1.5 degrees Celsius rise in temperature. But if we talk about what science tells us, you know, science tells us it's going to be closer to 4 degrees. We had thought that there would be a 1 meter rise in sea level. There was a report out in Oslo earlier this week that talks about 1.6 meter rise in sea level. Well, that's going to make sure that about 30% of Bangladesh disappears. A lot of the small island states here are going to disappear. So without an equal emphasis and focus on mitigation, deep emission cuts, we are only going to be treating the symptoms and not the causes.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Senator. Mamadou, I finally got to call you Mamadou like you wanted. You have the floor.
Thank you. Merci bien. Il sera prétentieux pour moi, pour nous, de répondre aux questions pertinentes qui ont été posées par l'assistance. C'est vrai, c'est de très bonnes questions, mais une a retenu un peu mon attention, de mettre le lien entre la préparation et la connaissance des causes. Nous vivons des exemples tous les jours. Les équipes de football qui jouent, l'équipe qui gagne, ce n'est pas celle qui réunit les meilleures vedettes, c'est seulement l'équipe qui est la mieux préparée. Nous devrons nous préparer. Nous devrons nous préparer pour vraiment résoudre ces conséquences, ces effets dus au phénomène du changement climatique. Les populations préparées sont celles qui résistent mieux face aux conséquences auxquelles nous ne pouvons pas nous soustraire. Il s'agit d'un bouleversement de phénomènes dont nous n'avons pas l'explication, certainement à des endroits, mais nous savons quand même que si un effet, disons, si une situation calamiteuse touche une population, elle ne fait que répondre à l'effet négatif. Donc, en se préparant mieux, nous pensons que nous gagnerons la bataille. Donc, en fait, les phénomènes du changement climatique menacent la vie et compromettent la subsistance. Nous n'avons qu'à fédérer nos actions encore une fois. Cette alliance pour la résilience est une approche, sinon est une alternative assez appropriée et assez pertinente. Il s'agira de mettre en commun, parce qu'il s'agit de phénomènes qui touchent l'ensemble du monde, qui touchent les populations sans distinction aucune de classe sociale ni de revenus. Donc, il s'agit pour chacun de nous de mettre en commun nos efforts. Et ces efforts, c'est de mettre en commun nos connaissances, mettre en commun nos ressources, mettre en commun notre disponibilité. Et ces connaissances dont nous parlons tant, il y a la connaissance scientifique, mais bien sûr, les paysans ont une certaine connaissance. Et cette connaissance empirique les a permis de résister face à beaucoup de phénomènes, sans une assistance extérieure. Donc, aujourd'hui, si nous mettons en commun l'ensemble de ces connaissances, les connaissances des communautés, les connaissances des scientifiques, l'expertise des intervenants qui sont les ONG, les organisations de la société civile, nous sommes convaincus que nous pouvons résoudre un certain nombre de phénomènes. Et nous sommes confiants qu'en nous donnant la main, et certainement, nous pourrons faire face mieux. Et la compréhension de ce bouleversement va suivre le train. Mais nous ne devrons pas attendre d'avoir les explications des phénomènes pour agir. Il faut agir maintenant. Et le mouvement Croix-Rouge, comme il faut le dire, encore une fois le rappeler, nous sommes 186 États. Et dans chaque État où il y a la Croix-Rouge, il y a des volontaires, il y a des employés, il y a des membres des élus. Donc c'est un vaste réseau qui est déjà, qui a une expertise dans la préparation face aux catastrophes. Et nous pensons que cela est vraiment la valeur ajoutée du mouvement Croix-Rouge, et qu'il y a aussi des besoins en lien avec l'expertise et les choses. Merci bien.
Again, join me in thanking the Let me say that how educated I became in the last couple of hours on this subject, and that's really important. I want to thank this very knowledgeable panel and very knowledgeable chair as well. But I also want to thank the team who helped me understand and put together this presentation to you and play the role I played. It is their dedication, the team behind me and over there, that enabled me to serve you this morning. I thank you, and I now turn the whole session to our very able chair, Mr. Giraud.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la modératrice. résumer cette session en 1 minute est complètement impossible. Le débat a été très riche et je tiens à remercier tout d'abord notre modératrice, Madame Rachida Dergam. Cette fois-ci, je pense que je l'ai... Je tiens à remercier également nos panélistes. Alors, je voudrais peut-être en 1 minute dire ce que j'en ai retiré et j'espère que ça correspond à ce que vous en avez retiré aussi. Tout d'abord, lorsqu'on parle de catastrophes naturelles et de changement climatique, il est impossible de réduire la question à 1 ou 2 priorités. Il s'agit à tous les niveaux d'un débat extrêmement complexe, d'un sujet extrêmement complexe, d'une matrice qui fait intervenir des acteurs et des sujets très variés. Et je crois qu'il faut prendre, si on veut avoir une chance de succès, c'est ce que j'ai retenu des questions, des interventions, il faut prendre le problème dans l'intégralité de ses dimensions. Ceci étant, le problème est tellement complexe qu'il faut quand même le simplifier. Et on a retenu un certain nombre de messages. Un des messages, c'est qu'il faut améliorer l'information disponible. Observation, information. Un deuxième message, c'est qu'il faut développer des services, des produits, des informations qui soient adaptés à l'utilisateur. Troisième message, ces utilisateurs sont à des niveaux très variés, depuis le fermier jusqu'au chef de gouvernement. Donc il s'agit d'un niveau très local, d'un niveau au niveau des municipalités, au niveau national, au niveau régional et au niveau international. On ne peut pas se focaliser uniquement sur un de ces niveaux. Les décisions sont prises à tous ces niveaux et il faut que ce soit reflété dans l'information et dans la disponible également. Ce qui était clair également, et c'était perçu à travers certaines questions, c'est qu'il y a un fossé entre les connaissances et les besoins. Donc, il faut combler ce fossé dans beaucoup de disciplines. Il y a 2 pièges, et c'était perçu par mes questions. Un piège, c'est de dire « on sait tout ». L'autre piège, c'est de dire « on ne sait rien ». La vérité, bien entendu, est entre les deux. Et la vérité dit qu'il faut améliorer notre connaissance, donc il faut accentuer dans toutes les régions, mais en particulier dans les pays en développement, les efforts de recherche. Autre message que j'ai retenu, c'est que tout ça, rien ne se produira si nous n'arrivons pas à identifier des fonds, des sources de financement, des partenariats. Ces partenariats, parce que le problème est complexe, parce que le problème est multidisciplinaire, ces partenariats doivent être multidisciplinaires également. Aucune organisation, aucune institution ne peut prétendre résoudre le problème à lui ou à elle seule. Donc il faudra développer des partenariats multidisciplinaires. Et je crois que les différents acteurs étaient bien représentés à la fois sur le podium, mais également dans la salle. Et puis je souhaiterais revenir à vous, Madame la modératrice. Les médias ont un rôle essentiel. Un rôle essentiel à la fois de vulgarisation, d'éducation, en cas d'alerte, bien sûr, d'avertir les populations à risque et tous ceux qui ont à prendre des décisions. Donc il faut absolument renforcer ce partenariat. Nous sommes ici dans une réunion organisée dans l'enceinte des Nations Unies, dans le cadre des Nations Unies. Il ne faut pas oublier le partenariat avec la société civile. Je suis content que la Croix-Rouge, Red Cross, Red Crescent Society était représentée ici. Il ne faut pas oublier le partenariat avec les ONG en général, avec le secteur privé. Il y a toutes sortes d'acteurs qui doivent jouer un rôle considérable. Il s'agit des associés. Alors, dans ce que j'ai décrit comme priorité, et Jan Egland me regarde certainement, ce sont les priorités du Global Framework pour le Climate Services. Ce n'est pas une coïncidence si l'équipe de haut niveau est venue avec ces priorités, parce que ce sont vraiment les piliers d'une action efficace. Ce que Jan Egland n'a pas dit, mais je crois que ça va résonner avec vous, c'est que dans le cadre de ce cadre global, la prévention des catastrophes a été identifiée comme une des 4 priorités fondamentales. Quelles sont les 3 autres priorités? La sécurité alimentaire, mais c'est aussi lié aux catastrophes. La santé, mais c'est aussi lié aux catastrophes. La gestion de l'eau, c'est aussi lié aux catastrophes. Nous avons des sujets qui sont nécessairement interagissent les uns avec les autres. Donc moi, ce que je souhaite en tant que président, c'est que vous ayez trouvé cette session aussi stimulante que je l'ai trouvée, que nous ne repartions pas simplement en disant « oui, c'était intéressant », mais comme l'a dit notre modératrice en disant J'ai appris beaucoup dans ces 2 heures. Donc on revienne tous en se disant qu'est-ce que je peux faire, comment je peux agir à titre individuel, à travers mon organisation, à travers mon gouvernement, pour faire bouger les choses. Et j'espère que dans 2 ans, on pourra se revoir et en disant, voilà, un certain nombre de choses ont bougé, et c'est en grande partie grâce à des réunions telles que celle-ci, grâce à des interactions telles que celle-ci. Je souhaite m'arrêter là. Merci beaucoup.